Welcome to Corporate Cafecito,
a Latine and business podcast where we share insights and strategies to help entrepreneurs and professionals thrive.
Welcome back to another episode of Corporate Cafecito. Yo soy Nayeli Suarez Gas. I can't even say my,
It's okay.
my name. Time for a coffee.
Yo soy Carlos Butler Vale.
You know what? Today we're going to talk about a topic that you may not think is like professional or like has to do with your workplace, but it impacts you as a whole. And that is what they're calling the sandwich generation. So a sandwich is two pieces of bread. It's a torta. And so it's two pieces of bread and the meat in the middle, and you are that meat in the middle because you are taking care of your grandparents, your parents, but also your children. And so you're stuck in the middle. Not stuck in a bad way, but you're in the middle and you're balancing both. And so a lot of times when you think about like our community, right? Did you know that like a third of Latinos live in a multi-generational household?
Yeah, I do. And, I don't currently, but I have in the past. And I have seen firsthand how challenging that can be.
Yeah.
And, obviously as our generations and our parents start to age, that is a big reality.
So a lot of what we do is live in multi-generational households.
Yeah.
When I was in high school, it was my parents, it was me in high school, it was my brother, his wife, their two kids. So we always had like a lot of people in the house, and
Mhm.
it just that's just how we grew up. And we had a cousin
Absolutely.
live with us, and when they came up from Mexico, people would stay with us, and we lived in a
I'm
one-bedroom house.
laughing. I'm laughing because so many memories are coming back for me.
Yeah. And I remember there was even a time when my brother and his wife and their kids were going to move out, and my dad was telling my nephew, he said, he's like, you're going to be able to have more room. He's like, you're not going to be todo squished.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't mind being squished, abuelito. And it was so sweet. And it was just like, it just speaks to how beautiful a community could be when you live together.
Yeah, and as beautiful as I think that might be, one of the
Mhm.
things that is important for us to keep in mind is that when we think about the Hispanic community, and not just specifically the Hispanic community, but we take that one layer lower or one layer deeper, I should say, Latinas are actually more likely than any other group to leave the workforce due to caregiving.
Yeah.
And that should raise, I think, significant alarms for us
Yeah.
because it shouldn't necessarily have to feel like a choice. And the fact is that I would say women in general feel this probably more than any other group. But there is something to be said about the fact that Latinas in particularly are more likely to leave the workforce.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts
So
on that?
one, I'm personally, in that boat.
Yeah.
As my parents' health has deteriorated and my mom's in a wheelchair now. I have found that I've had to take a lot of breaks, and maybe take on a reduced workload,
Mhm.
because I'm taking care of her,
Yeah.
because of her surgeries, and not taking vacations, and only taking time to work. And it's very hard. I could 100% not only sympathize, but also like I'm in it with you guys,
Yeah.
as we go through this. The sad part is, there was this funny, like, I think it was on TikTok, and it was like, cuando te lleva tu hijo o tu hija al doctor. And so it was like, and the girl's like, the doctor walks in and she's like, oh, doctor, estamos aquí porque mi mamá tiene esto, blah, blah, blah. And she has not used the bathroom since, in the last 24 hours, and she is fasting and blah, 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 blah. And then it has the son,
Yeah.
and he goes, Ma, te está hablando el doctor.
Oh my God.
And so,
Yeah. My role is to bring you here, and then you go from
yeah.
there. That's funny.
But it made me laugh because I was like, oh my God, that's so
I
true.
might be, yeah, listen, we're not quite there yet, but I would say between my sister and me, I could absolutely see, how that can happen.
Yeah.
And, the reality is, again, it is, some of it is wiring and some of it is, I think, cultural conditioning too.
Oh,
Because
100%.
there is this sort of sense an idea, and I think so many of our cultures in
Mhm.
our Latinidad that is based on sort of patriarchal kind of hierarchies that we sort of put the responsibility on the women around us. So even if it's
We're
not our
changing that though.
hermanas,
Yeah.
I love that, but
Yeah.
I'm saying traditionally though, even if it's not our hermanas or our tias, it we do this thing where it's like, okay, well, no, I don't want you. And sometimes, for example, my mom would probably be the one to say, no quiero que tú me lleves, quiero que tu hermana me lleve.
Yeah. Oh, my mom does
Right?
that.
And
Yeah.
so there is a little bit of that, but that brings me, I think, to another really good point, which is around this, the challenges around the stigmas and how we challenge some of these things, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um, and I would love, I think, particularly because you're dealing with this, and we talked about this in a previous episode, but there's this kind of concept or notion of you take care of your own
Very much, right?
mentality, which I
Family
think
first.
feels
Mhm.
very specific to minority,
Mhm.
underrepresented communities. But I think I can only speak to personally how I experience it in the Latino community. So, can you talk a little bit about how you've had to even
Yeah.
challenge that?
Yeah. So one, I get a massage every month.
Love it.
And it's the only time when I go and I'm just like, I can't have my phone on me. No one can reach me. Blah, blah.
Good.
I lie to my parents sometimes when I go get my massage.
Really?
Yeah, because I don't want them to be like, oh, tienes tiempo para un masaje. But like,
Ah,
so it's a very weird thing. But I have started like, I have to take care of me to take care of you. I
oh,
have
I
to
love
take care of
that.
me to take care of you. And ironically, like sometimes when my family's over, I'm like, oh, good, I'm not gonna go. And someone was like, well, we go see your mom, but we never see you there. And I'm like, because I take breaks when you guys are there. I
Right.
can go do other stuff where I could,
Good. And by the way, enjoy the time
yeah,
with her. Yeah.
yeah. And yeah,
Uninterrupted.
you don't need me
Yeah,
there.
yeah, exactly.
But my dad is still very, very involved in my mom's caregiving. He drives her to the doctor every day. But I think that a lot of times the responsibility does fall on the daughter. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I wish I had a sister. I have
I have
two,
one, thankfully.
yeah, I
I have
have two
two,
brothers,
actually.
but it does fall on us because we are considered that maternal or
Yeah.
caregiving um persona. I don't know even how to say that because
Yeah.
for boys, like they don't think of like, oh, ponte a lavar los trastes. Like my
Yeah.
mom, one time my husband was washing dishes and she's like, make him stop, and I
But
was like,
that's
I will not make
but
him
that's
stop.
part of that
Yeah.
patriarchal sort
Yeah.
of, yeah, absolutely. And I think to just even take that a step
Mhm.
up, right? It's not just necessarily like a woman thing, even though I know that that is obviously existing, but this, part of this is around the fact that there is this stigma in the Latino community, the Latin community, Hispanic, where we say, no, we're not going to put them in a home. We're not going to put them
Oh
here. We're not going
no.
to put them there.
Yeah,
We
no.
don't let anyone else take care of our own. We do it.
Right.
So
And by we do it, I mean you
you
do
do it.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. But and so that's why there is this kind of snowball effect that
Right.
when we sit here and think about, we take care of our own, come on folks, let's also realize that there is an extra layer there where it does obviously create more work, more pressure,
Yeah.
more challenges, I think, for one specific type of or group of people demographic than
Yeah.
the other.
I agree. And what? I saw this beautiful quote and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I think I might have cried when I read it, but it said, I want to be a better ancestor than descendant.
Love it.
And I think about like, because, the sandwich generation means we're taking care of our parents, but it means we're also taking care of our children. And it
Yes.
means that we have to divide these hours of the day in how we can best take care of the people that we take care of.
Yeah.
And so when you think about balancing work, and sometimes, and I have seen this in people that I have employed, they're like, coming to work feels like a break.
Yeah.
Imagine that you go to work and that so it feels
And
like a
that feels
break.
like the break. Yeah.
And so part of it is, we can be very judgmental of like, oh,
Yeah.
but you didn't do this, but you didn't do this. And I would say a lot of it is guilt. Like we are focused on guilt. Oh, pero no viniste. Oh, pero no me llamaste. Oh,
Yeah.
pero, like there's always going to be a focus on what we didn't do.
Yeah.
And so I would tell you, like, especially as we're taking care of our parents and our children, focus on the positive and also learn to kind of say, when I am at work, I am working. And
Yeah.
I had to, part of what I did with my parents was say, when you were my age, were you this available to your parents? Right.
Yeah.
And I will say I love that my career has let me, like take this time and
Yeah.
have this time to take care of my parents, that I can take off and be like, I'm not going to, and but I also feel like in the past year I have exhausted my goodwill with my community, like,
Yeah.
because I have been so like,
On.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so, I'm in the rebuilding phase of putting that back together so that I can be the
I
best
love
version
that.
of me at work.
Yeah.
And also telling, the people who rely on me, like I've taught my kids to cook. Like today you're gonna cook it when I get home,
Yeah.
and also, balancing with my parents, but then also making sure I get the time away from both to just really cargar baterías,
Yeah, I'm a big believer you really can't pour out of an empty
Mhm.
cup. I heard that
That's a
several
good
years
one.
ago, and that has just always resonated with me because visually, when you think about it, we all kind of can envision that empty
Mhm.
cup, and it's just impossible. And speaking of, the reality is that being part of the sandwich generation obviously does come with a lot of challenges, particularly for the caregiver. And that I think adds additional pressure to the challenges in the workplace. So, for
Yeah.
example, we've talked about how sometimes we're afraid to move, and the reality is that there is such a thing as a financial strain that comes with being the caretaker, whether it's
Yeah.
making sure that you're making enough to support your kids, that you're supporting your parents. Obviously, oftentimes there's family abroad that might need help, and so we there's something there. We've talked about this in the past where there are folks who can be supporters, that can
Mhm.
be advocates for people as they're particularly going through some of these situations, but we have to recognize the fact that
It's a
financial
heavy load.
strain obviously adds to that load, in addition to the career sacrifices, right? We don't want to
But
necessarily
yeah,
leave
we
our
talked about how
jobs.
few Latinas are in senior leadership roles and how
Yeah,
few are CEOs at Fortune 500 companies.
absolutely.
And so I think, it's just a conflicting priority. I do think, though, we do it exceptionally well.
Yeah.
I think that when you think
we're
about, yeah, the
we're a product
fact,
of our own.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
the fact that whenever I tell someone like, oh, I got to do this, I have like, there's like 50 other women who are going through the same exact thing,
Yeah.
tells me that, not only like it's not just an expectation, it's something that I enjoy doing
But
and I get to do.
can I
What?
just say that I
Mhm.
think you're already shifting the generational narrative by even speaking or talking about it,
Mhm.
because
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember when you and I were chatting about it, and we had a really great heart to heart about just kind of how much it was weighing,
Yeah.
on, for you as an entrepreneur, but obviously just generally, right, as a parent, as a
Mhm.
child, as as someone's child. And so the fact that you're even able to speak to these things with other
Right.
people is already a big
I
step in the right
agree.
direction,
Yeah,
because in the
because before we
past
wouldn't talk about
you
it.
wouldn't talk about it, and so
No.
you wouldn't even know that 50 other people were potentially going through something like this.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think we've been very vocal. I love, I feel encouraged by, other Latinas who are like, we will change this for our kids. Like I told my husband, I'm like, when I see our health start to get complicated, I'm gonna check us in ourselves to a retirement community and, enjoy
I'm
the
not
meals and
I'm not
the
that far off
yeah.
from a 55 active.
Yeah.
I'm not really not that far off these days. So I should
But
start looking at some point
yeah, I'm
soon,
like,
but
like put us on the waiting list.
I do want it to be an active,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
active community.
But I think to me, I think the most important thing is acknowledging that, we are going through this together.
Yeah.
Understanding that some of it is going to be cultural norms that we've accepted, right? Because in order for us to do it, we must accept the cultural norm, but enjoy it. right?
Yeah.
So how do we make the best of it? How do we, where does, like, my happiness comes from seeing my mom getting better,
Yeah.
from being able to do the things that I can do because it makes me happy to do them for her.
Absolutely. And
Um,
and finding that balance, right?
yeah.
So, I think that's actually a really great segue into, because as we think about our audience, we have a
Hmm.
lot of folks here who are people leaders, who are entrepreneurs, that can set the tone for the types of workplace, let's say benefits and
Hmm.
things of that nature. And we get it, right? There's a tremendous range and a spectrum in terms of,
Right.
of who's listening and what they're able to do. But when we think about, because this just keeps sticking out to me, the fact that Latinas are more likely than any other group
To
to leave
leave
the
the
workforce.
workforce.
There is something there that we probably should talk about, which is around, because we're very action oriented, and so um, you know what can we do? And so one of the things, just bringing it back to some of the workplace culture and engagement things that that are always been a passion point for me, has been to think about, for example, things like many Latinos just don't have access to caregiving benefits. And so now, generally, if you're a big organization, you're offering these up for everybody, but not every Latino, or certainly not all of the ones that are listening to our podcast, are part of those big
Right.
organizations. And so that is one thing that's a challenge. And so when we think about that, obviously there's an opportunity there to consider
Hmm.
some workplace
Yeah, changes.
caregiving benefits.
Right. Carlos, and I think we need to pick, like, what it is, right? And we're not going to solve that right
Love
now,
that.
but
Yeah.
think about before there were, like, if you were a nursing mother, there was nowhere to pump at the airport when I
Mm,
had my son, and my kids are now 12 and 14. Okay, so this was 12 years ago. There was nowhere to pump. And it took one Latina getting pissed off at O'Hare to write the National Federal Lactation Bill,
I love
which
that.
required pods in every airport.
Wow.
So we are steps away from that.
Yeah.
We've got to figure out what we want, because once
Yeah.
we know what we want, we know how to get it.
Yeah.
And, I think that until then, I think we need to focus on, the things we can do, understanding that we can't do everything, work on, how to maximize the time, but also, you can't, what'd you say?
You
You
can't
can't,
pour it out of an empty cup.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
like, we need our cups full of cafecito so that we could give that
That's
warmth to
right.
others.
I'm ready for my refill.
Yeah.
Um, some of the solutions, right? To your point,
Hmm.
offering things like flexible work arrangements, paid family and elder care leave. Obviously, depending on the state that you live in, you
Right.
may have more or less access to these things. But just even recognition of caregiving as a workplace issue, I think
Yeah.
is really important, because the reality is, so at one of my previous companies, we actually changed it to from parents to just parents, from just parents to parents and caregivers, because we wanted to acknowledge the fact
Yeah.
that there is this sort of sandwich generation. But one of the other things that we think is really important to call out is the fact that we need to destigmatize
Yes.
the need for flexibility. And because what I've heard from a lot of people is that they fear being seen as less committed at
Yeah.
work.
I
So
mean, every woman on maternity leave, has had at least a little bit of self-doubt just coming back. And if you haven't, like, good for you. But I think yeah, like, yes. Um,
power to you.
yeah, but I think that we need to change it. Um, I don't know how we're going to change it yet, but I know that there has to be something. And I would just say, even just us talking about it, like you said, raises
Yeah.
awareness. And so we could have that empathy to people who are going through it, so that when they're going through it, they were not also worried about their job.
Absolutely. And again, this is something that is going to be impacting all of us probably
Mhm.
at one point or another. And so this is where that grace
Yeah.
can really come into play. And There are some I would say low lift ways, making sure that you're doing things like renaming your business resource groups or employee resource groups to acknowledge that caregiving
Yeah, is
element of
part
it,
of it.
but
Yeah.
also ensuring that leaders are just giving visibility when they're speaking about any type of workplace benefits or anything else like that. That this comes from this notion or sense or idea that there is such a thing as a sandwich generation, and if you want to take it a step further, acknowledge that this impacts other people in different ways depending on your cultural, racial heritage and background. Those are all things that can be, I think, transformative.
Yeah.
And again, creating space for these conversations.
Agree.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I also want to make sure we acknowledge the people who help us do these
Love
things.
that.
So
Yeah.
like nurses, doctors, teachers, la nana, la señora, the neighbors, everyone who watches our kids while we watch our parents or watches our parents while we watch our kids. I think that when we talk about cultural norms, while the Latinas may be the ones absorbing it, we don't stand alone. We have a big community
Love
behind
it.
us, and so I would just encourage you in this next week, until the next episode of Corporate Cafecito, to be warm, share the warmth, and also acknowledge the people who are part of your community that help you do what you do.
Yeah, and really quickly, just to end, we can continue to end the stigma by doing the types of things that you're talking about,
Mhm.
which is to just simply
Yeah.
share with your network, make sure that you're creating boundaries for yourself, and it's okay to be explicit with people about why, because that's how we role model for
Mhm.
folks, and I
Yeah,
think sometimes that's a power that we tend
I
to
agree.
forget. And remember that asking for help is not a failure.
No, it's
It
not a
is not a
weakness. We
failure. It
need
is not
help,
a
get help.
weakness. And this is how we absolutely can go ahead and do and continue to change the narrative.
Absolutely.
So with that, by the way, if you have any particular stories of your own to share, I know
Yeah.
Nayeli has shared some of
Share
hers.
them with us.
Please go ahead and
Yeah.
share them again. You're sharing with the broader community. There's power in knowing that there are 50 others
Yeah,
like
that you're
you,
not alone.
that you're not
Yeah.
alone. And this is how we continue to obviously provide support and
Yeah.
care for one another. So
So, nos vemos la próxima semana.
hasta pronto.